You're watching at France 24. Welcome to the program. I'm Markus Karlsson. What is the future of oil and where is the world's energy going to come from? Those questions are taking center stage here at the 14th International Oil Summit, which is underway in Paris. It brings together energy ministers and oil executives from around the world. And one of the key players is the executive director of the International Energy Agency. Her name is Maria van der Hoeven, and she's with us here today. Welcome to the program. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, the world has a voracious appetite for energy, but looking into the future, will oil be playing the same role as it has been for the past few decades?
Well, to be honest, we expect an increase in demand, so demand growth of about 30% between now and 2035. And the fossil fuels, so oil as well, will be a very, very substantial part of that. And at this moment, from a global point of view, 32% of that energy mix is oil. That will go down a little bit to 27%, but it will still be number one.
But there is all this talk of the shale gas revolution. Mm-hmm. Shale gas, that is gas extracted from far deep beneath the surface, yes, using a method called fracking, which is a very controversial method in and of its own. Don't you think that shale energy will be eating into demand for oil?
That's correct. We expect gas to be more prominent than it is now, although it's already quite prominent, and to grow into the energy, to have a greater part of the energy mix. But nevertheless, oil will be number one. But what we do see in gas is that gas is everywhere. Shale gas is everywhere. So what many countries are interested in is to replicate one way or the other the shale gas boom that brought so much economic prosperity and low gas prices to the United States.
Mm. Taking the discussion just back to oil for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
Some experts, though, that they predict that we'll actually see a peak in oil demand during this decade. You and the International Energy Agency are saying that that's way too soon.
Oh yes, that's way too soon. That's way too soon. And it's not only a peak in oil demand, that's way too soon, but also a peak in oil supply, that's way too soon. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, the interesting thing is there is so much technology coming online that it's very difficult to predict at this moment a peak. We tried to do it a couple of years and a couple of decades before. And again we were proved wrong. So I wouldn't do that.
As you say, we've had this discussion about peak oil, yes, for decades. The moment when we won't get more oil out of the ground, yeah, basically, and when production will peak. Do you think it's better to talk about a peak demand for oil rather than peak oil? We should talk about peak demand, yes, for oil.
Well, maybe it is. But as I mentioned before, the increase in oil demand will be there. And it's not only... No, I have to put it in a different way. The reason for that is that the countries in Asia, especially China, especially India, they are really looking for oil everywhere. It's very important to them. And the biggest demand growth will be in countries like China, will be in India. We expect 60% of the demand growth to be happening in China. So I think, again, it's very, very difficult to speak about peak demand.
Mm-hmm. What will happen to energy prices seeing the growing demand in emerging markets like India, mm-hmm, like China? Do you foresee that they'll keep going up, or will natural gas, as it comes online, will it be able to sort of answer the supply side of things and make sure that the demand doesn't peak massively and prices with that?
Well, the interesting thing about gas is that there are also quite some other things, interesting things about gas. For instance, the use of gas in the chemical industry, the use of gas in transport instead of oil. So that is one of the things I would like to mention. And the second thing is, what we can see is that unconventional oil like light tight oil is coming to the market as well. So what we do hope that this will loosen the tightness of the market as we've seen it now. And then of course there's another issue, and it's maybe it's strange, but it's about how you use your oil, how you use your gas. And in our opinion, you can do it in a much more efficient way than you do it now. Mm-hmm. Just by using efficiency technologies, they are there. and you have to use them. What we see in the United States is that they use fuel efficiency for combustion engines, and it really brings demand down. So this will happen everywhere as well. And if it really goes to fly, this efficiency issue, it will halve the demand growth, and that will be very important, we think.
A barrel of oil is currently trading between $90 a barrel and $100. Are you comfortable with those kind of price levels?
Well, what means comfortable? What we can see is that when you have price levels high for a long time, that it endangers the recovery of your economy, especially in, for instance, the emerging countries where imports bill are rising sky high. So that's one of the issues. The other thing is when prices are high like that for a long time, it encourages companies, countries to look for alternatives, and this is what we can see happening as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, who are the winners and losers in this game looking ahead? You and the International Energy Agency, you forecast that the United States will be the #1 oil producer in the world by 2020. So I suppose the United States should be seen as a winner in the energy game looking ahead. But what other countries?
Oh yes, they'll be the winner for the time being, because it's a rebound of their production. We have seen a huge oil and gas production in the United States some decades ago, and then it went down and down. And what we can see now, there is a rebound of the oil and gas production, but it's only temporary, especially for oil. So the question is what will happen after 2020? And then it will flatten. It will flatten and then go down again. But for the time, they are a winner. And they are first movers, so that's also very important.
First movers when it comes to shale oil and gas.
First, yes, exactly. And then the question is, what can other countries do? At this moment, quite some countries are investigating their resources. And of course, there are also other sounds, people who don't like it, there's opposition. So that's exactly the reason why we tell everybody, if you really want to replicate the success of the unconventional gas in the United States, please see to it that you exploit your gas, your unconventional, in a sustainable way. And that means that you have to answer all these concerns about water, about fracking, about environmental issues as well. And you have to engage the public. And that's something I think is very, very important. So that's why we are working on golden rules for the golden age of gas.
Because of the concerns you just mentioned there, France has effectively frozen shale gas development in this country. Do you think that's been a mistake?
It's up to France to decide on that, but what I do know is that their import bills on gas are quite high. And the other thing is, we saw the situation in the UK, where at the beginning there was this ban on the issue of shale gas. Now the ban is gone and they are discussing it. We can see the situation in Poland, where there are huge resources of unconventional gas, of shale gas, where they at this moment are working on it so that they can go ahead. We can see it in Ukraine. But of course, it's up to a country to decide on that. It's not something that can be decided by anybody else. It's up to France.
Now, as attention has turned to natural gas, shale gas and shale oil, do you think that attention is turning away from renewable energies?
Oh no, definitely not.
There is not that risk?
No, what we can see at this moment, that is the interest for renewables and the investments in renewables are growing. Although we have to admit that they need policy support in money and policy support in a stable investment climate. That's necessary. But as I mentioned before, high prices give also opportunities for renewables. And what we can see is a growth in wind, a growth in solar. We can see it all over the world, but especially in Europe.
What countries are taking the lead when it comes to renewable energy?
That's difficult to answer, because when you see, for instance, in other countries outside Europe, there's Brazil taking a lead in wind. They have a new system of reverse auctioning that makes it possible not to have any subsidies anymore. We can see huge investments in solar in, for instance, Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates. We can see huge investments in wind and solar in China, and in geothermal, for instance, in Australia and Indonesia. So everybody is looking also into these renewable options to find them and to make them profitable.
But it is still fairly expensive.
It still is fairly expensive, but it's not evenly expensive everywhere. When you don't have a lot of solar, well, then it will be very expensive when you want to have more solar energy. But when you do have a lot of wind, it's much less expensive and it will be competitive as it is in Brazil.
Just here towards the end, I want to talk a little bit about coal. It's a very dirty fuel, so to speak. It emits a lot of carbon when you burn it.
Well, it's the dirtiest fuel we have. Let's be honest about it.
What's going to happen with that type of fuel then?
The interesting thing is that where in the United States coal is pushed out of the market because of this cheap gas, we at this moment see a renaissance of coal in Europe, where this cheap coal pushes gas out of the market in power generation. That's what I'm talking about. And what we also mentioned in our midterm coal market report is that the world is using more and more coal, even when it's being less in China, but in India, but still the growth figures are there. And if it goes on like that, we expect the world to burn about 1.2 billion tons of coal more in 2035.
That's a lot of coal.
That's a lot of coal. And you know, that's exactly the amount of coal that is at this moment being used in the United States and in Russia together. So it's an awful lot of coal.
So coal is not going out of fashion anytime soon?
Coal is not going out of fashion, but it's exactly the reason why we emphasize the use of CCS, carbon capture and storage, as a way to make the coal use cleaner than it is now.
All right, Maria van der Hoeven, unfortunately we have run out of time. Thank you very much once again for speaking to us here at the 14th International Oil Summit. And with that, we're also going to say thank you to you at home for watching. Stay with us here at France 24.